So at some point along the line, you're probably going to want to create something that has more of a complex structure, such as Wicker. And it can seem daunting at first, but if you have a good knowledge of the tools inside of Blender, it's actually a lot simpler than you would think. In this video, I'll be showing you how I managed to come up with a way to make a simple wicker basket. Now, this isn't the only way to do this, and I wouldn't even go as far as to say it's the best way, but it serves as a good modeling exercise. Alright, so here we are inside of Blender. And what I'm going to do to start out is I'm going to go to the render settings and I'm going to change to cycles and change to GPU compute. And before I delete this cube, I'm going to load in a material because there's going to be parts along the way where I want to unwrap before proceeding. And you'll see why later on. So in the shading tab, with the material created, I'm actually going to call this wood. So I have Node Wrangler enabled, so what I'm going to do is select this principal node and hit Control T. And that's just going to add this node setup like this. And the image I'll be using is a free one from Polygon, and I'll link to it in the description. So I'll bring in the color. And I'll duplicate this image node. And bring in the glossy. Set it to non-color data. Plug in this mapping node. Oops. And because it's a glossy node going into a roughness input, we're going to have to invert it. So we'll just do that for now. And I'll bring in the normal map. I'm going to keep this simple for now. I'm not going to go too crazy with the material. Shift A, add normal map. And set it to non-color data. And that should be good for now. Alright, so now I'm going to go back to the modeling tab. And I'm going to tab out of edit mode, select everything, and delete it. And the first thing I'm going to do here is add in a cylinder, and I'm just going to make it the basic shape of the basket that I'm trying to create. So we'll go into edit mode, grab this face down here, hit G and Z to bring it up on the Z axis. And then select this top face and hit S Shift Z to scale it on the X and the Y. And I'll just pull it out to something like that. Real simple. We're just going to be using this as sort of a guide mesh to pull geometry from. So what I'll do actually is go up here to the outliner and name this guide mesh. Alright. So now what I'm going to do is tab back into edit mode. And I'm going to select this bottom face. And I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. Left click, hit P, and selection to make it its own object. Now I'm going to tab out of edit mode, and I'm going to select the cylinder and hit H to hide it. Alright, and I'm going to select the face here, hit I, inset, go to vertex select, hit X, and delete vertices because we don't need that face. We just want this ring of vertices like this. So now I'm going to hit A to select all and go select. Checker deselect so that we get every other vertex. And then I'm going to hit 7 to go into top view. And I'm going to hit S, Shift Z, and pull them out like so to start forming that weave pattern. And this can be a little bit drastic because we're going to add a subsurf to it, which will ease it out. So something like that would be okay. Alright, so now I'm going to go to Object with this selected and convert to Curve. And in the curve properties over here, I'm going to go to the geometry dropdown and I'm going to bring the depth up to 0.01. And I'll right click it and hit shade smooth. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to select it and go to object and convert it back into a mesh. Alright, so now what I'm going to do real quick is unwrap this and apply that material to it. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, select all, and go U, cylinder projection. And then let's put that wood on it. And let's go into look dev and just have a look. Alright, let's go to the edit UV editing tab and see what's going on here. Yeah, that's a bit better. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's really small detail and we can deal with the UV later. We just want to get it unwrapped and get something put on it for now. And I do acknowledge that this is a little too glossy, and we'll deal with that later on. So let's go back to the modeling tab, and let's get out of look dev. And now let's make this start to take that shape of that cylinder that we had. So we want it to move up and outwards. So I'm going to hide the cylinder, and I'm going to add in an empty. And then with this object selected, I'm going to go to the modifiers tab, and I'm going to add an array modifier. I'm going to turn on object offset and select this empty. Set this value here, that's 1 by default, to 0. And then move it up on the Z over here on the relative offset. And we can bring the count up a bit too. Now, if I select this and I hit S, Shift Z, it'll actually start to scale outwards and inwards. It moves pretty drastically though, so you might want to hold Shift to get more fine-tuned control. And I'm going to unhide that cylinder real quick so I can just see. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I'll increase the count a little bit so that it reaches up there. Alright, cool. So, now we need to duplicate this, move it up and rotate it, but we can't just duplicate this by itself, because if we change this or the empty individually, it'll change the shape of this. So we actually have to select both of these and duplicate it, but because we're going to have 2 of these and 2 empties, I'm going to actually name these up here to try and stay organized. So I'll call this outer weave 1, and I'll just make this empty 1. I'll just number the empties 1 and up to keep track of them. Alright, so we're going to select the empty and the outer weave here. Hit Shift D, click, grab it, and move it up on the Z so that it sits in between, like so. And then we'll hit 7 to go to top view, and we'll hit RZ. And just move it until they're opposite one another, like that. And that looks pretty good to me. Alright, and I renamed that empty 2, and we'll call this outer weave 2. And real quick, what I'll do is I'll add that subsurf to it. So subdivision subsurface, and then go to this one and subdivision subsurface. And you can see it's starting to look a lot better now. Alright, so now we have to create the vertical parts of the weave that go through where it's looping here. So we'll bring back that guide mesh. And we'll tab into edit mode. And we'll select this edge. Hit Shift D, click, P to separate it, and hit selection. And then select the guide mesh and hide it. And you can see we're left with this straight line here. I'm going to go up to Object, set Origin to Geometry, and then I'm going to rotate it on the Y a bit till it sits right in between that loop there. So I'm going to bring it back on the X a little bit, like so. Alright. And I'm going to now go to Object, Convert to Curve. And again, over here in the curve settings, I'm going to give it a depth of 0.01. And we can shade it smooth. Alright, so now we need this to spin around this. And you might be thinking to use the spin tool, but the problem with that is that it creates a whole bunch of these in edit mode, which means they're all part of one object, which makes it really annoying to deal with when it comes to UV unwrapping and texturing. So I'm again going to use a modifier and an empty. So let's go over here real quick and let's rename this vertical weave, and then we will go in and add an array to it. Actually, first let's go convert to and convert it back to a mesh and just select it, or I'm sorry, go into edit mode, select it, hit U and cylinder projection, and then apply that wood material to it. And what you can do is select it and hit the button, the slash button right underneath the backspace. Sometimes in Blender 2.8 it doesn't work like you just saw, so hit it twice if it doesn't, and then hit it again. and you should get this by itself. And I'm going to go into look dev and just see how it looks right now. And that looks pretty bad, so let's go to UV editing. Again, I'm going to hit that slash, tab into edit mode. Okay, and that did not work at all. So let's try just a regular unwrap. That doesn't work. How about Smart UV Project? Alright, Smart UV Project seems to work pretty good. I think that's pretty good for now, so we're just going to leave it like that. We'll go back to modeling, and we'll hit that slash again to bring everything back, and we'll get it out of look dev mode for now. Alright, so now what we can do for the time being actually to make this easier is we can just box select these empties and hit H to hide them. We don't really need to mess with them anymore. So now we're going to add in another empty, and I'll name that empty 3. And we'll select this vertical part right here, go to the modifiers tab, add an array modifier, choose object offset and select the empty, turn off relative offset, and control A, all transforms. Now if we go up to top view and I grab that empty and I rotate it on the Z, you'll see it makes a duplicate like so. So I'll move it to like right there, and then I'll select this to go back to that modifier, and I'll bring the count up, and you're going to see that it doesn't line up well, which is okay. Make as many of them as you can before it really starts to clip and line up incorrectly, and then just hit RZ on the empty, hold shift, and just slowly adjust them. Alright, and let's go back and bring the count up some more. And we'll grab this again, hit RZ, hold shift, and something like that. Looks pretty good. Okay. So now we have to create the bottom of this, and real quick I'll hide that empty because we're not going to really be doing anything else with it for now. Now, the bottom is something that I really struggled to try and figure out how to do. I wanted to keep the same sort of weave pattern but moving inwards, and I tried a million different ways of doing it. I tried using an array modifier, which made it move inwards, but it made them get really thin and tiny. I tried using the curve extras and adding a swirl, but I couldn't get two swirls to sit inside of one another, which is what I would need in order to create a weave pattern. So as a last resort, what I ended up doing is just making a flat weave pattern and using a Boolean modifier to cut out this shape, because it's going to be hidden by the rope-like weave that goes around the bottom and top of this. So let's do that now. So let's select everything here, hide it, and we'll add in a cube, tab into edit mode and make sure you're in vertex select mode. Right click, go merge vertices at center just to get that one vertex. Then we'll hit E, Y, 1 to extrude it on the Y by 1 unit. And then we can press Shift R a bunch of times just to repeat that process. Something like that should be fine. Then we'll select all. We'll go to select and we'll hit check or deselect. But I actually want the other one, so I'm going to go select invert. Oops, I accidentally deselected everything, so I'm going to do that again. Select, check or deselect, select invert. And then we'll hit G, Z, 0.2. Like so. Alright, now we'll hit Shift D. And we'll move it on the X by 1 unit for now. And we'll convert both of these to curves. So let's go Object, Convert to, Curve. Go to the curve settings and increase the depth to 0.06. And just do that for both of these. Alright, and then grab one of the two weaves and hit G, Y, 1 to offset it by 1 so that the peaks and the troughs of each of these weaves are opposite one another. And then what we can do is we can select this end point right here. We can hit E, X, -1, or I'm sorry, That's incorrect. Let's undo that. Let's hit EY -1 and then GZ2. Or I'm sorry again. We want GZ 0.2. And then this last one over here we can just delete. So now they're even. Alright, now I'm going to convert them back into objects. So convert to mesh. Convert to mesh. And at this point, it's probably a good idea to unwrap these. So I'll go U. Let's do Smart UV Project. Let's see how that looks. We'll go over here. We'll apply that wood material. Tab out of edit mode and go into look dev. And let's smooth it. And that actually doesn't look too bad to me. So I think that's how I'm going to do it for now. Do the same thing with this. U, Smart UV Project. Okay, add that wood. Beautiful. Also shade smooth. Alright. So now let's bring these closer together. So I'll hit G, X, and I'll bring it to about there. And let's add that vertical piece that's going to go through these weaves real quick. So we'll go Shift A, cube. Tab into edit mode, make sure you have vertex selection active. Right click, merge vertices at center. And then we'll just go EX and we'll just pull it down to somewhere like here. Alright, we'll go object, convert to, curve, go to the curve settings, bring it up to 0.06. Alright, and then we'll go right click, smooth it, grab it, move it on the Y, 1 unit, and then bring it up on the Z until it's right in between, like so. And we can actually move it on the X a little bit. Just bring it in there like that. Alright, and let's convert this back into a mesh. So object, convert to, mesh. Let's tab into edit mode. And let's go U and try cylinder project and see what happens. Let's go over to UV editing and see what that looks like. And that messes it up pretty badly, which is strange because it's a cylinder. Perhaps if I add a seam to this it'll look better, but let's just try U Smart UV Project and see what happens. And that actually looks perfect. So we'll go back to modeling, tab out of edit mode, go to the shading tab and add a wood to it. Let's go into look dev, and yeah, that looks pretty much perfect. So we'll leave it just like that for now. Alright, so now what we're going to start doing is adding array modifiers to all of these things. So let's start with this weave pattern right here. We'll go to the modifiers, add modifier, array. And you can keep relative offset checked, but we have to adjust this value here so that it reaches to the other side of this weave, like so. And then we can bring the count up till it reaches all the way down. Alright, and let's just do the same thing for this one. Actually, let's see what that value was. We had it set to 3, so we'll do the same for this one. Add array modifier, set this to 3, and bring the count up. And that looks pretty good. So now let's select this, add an array modifier, and we want it to move on the Y, so we'll bring the count up right here. Or I'm sorry, we'll bring the distance up right here on the Y. And let's bring the count up and see how that lines up. Oop, that's way too many. Alright, it looks like it's not lining up right, so we'll adjust this value a bit. And that actually looks perfect. Alright, so at this point, it's probably a good idea to parent these all to one of the components here so that we can move it easily. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll select all, shift click on this weave pattern right here, and then I'll go Control P, object keep transform, and that way if I select this weave pattern and I move it around, it'll all move. Alright, so now we'll unhide everything. And as you can see, this is way too big, so we can size it down. And move it on the X and Y until it sits underneath the basket. And size it down a little bit more. Let's go to top view. Size it up a little bit. Something like that should do. Alright, so once you get this sized appropriately to fit underneath the basket, what we're going to want to do is select this guide cylinder. Let's tab into edit mode. Select the bottom face. Hit Shift D. Click. P. Selection. And then let's hide this guide cylinder. And let's select this. Go into edit mode. Select that face. Hit E. Z. And just pull it up to make a cylinder like so. And now we have to add a Boolean modifier to each one of these components that make up this weave, with this being what controls it. So what we'll do is we'll bring this to about right there. We'll select one of the weaves, add a Boolean modifier, and select this. Make sure it's set to intersection under the operation drop down here, and just do that for each of these. Alright, and once you do that, we can hide the cylinder, and you can see we have this circular weave pattern, which is nice. So now let's bring everything back. Let's hide this guide mesh and hide the cylinder. And you can see it's a bit too small, so what we can do is unhide the cylinder, and we can size it up just a bit like so. Hide it again, and this is a little bit too high, so let's select the weave that everything's parented to. I believe it's this one. Nope, it's the other one. And just bring it down a little bit. Now there's spots on the edge here that are a little bit messy and not looking good, but that's okay because it'll be hidden by the next thing that we're going to create, which is that rope-like weave pattern that goes along the bottom and the top of the basket. So real quick, I'm going to try and organize everything. So this cube right here, this is bottom weave 1, and then let's select the other one. They're all parented, so that's fine. We can actually just call this bottom weave, like so. And what else is it named here? So guide mesh 001 is the Boolean cylinder, and then guide mesh is just guide mesh. Good. So what we can actually do is show the guide mesh, and tab into edit mode, select the top face, hit Shift D, click, hit P, selection, go over here, turn off the guide mesh, and with this top face that we just created selected, we can hit the slash underneath the backspace button so that it's by itself, and we can go into edit mode, select the face, inset, hit X to delete the vertices so that we just get this one outer ring, and then we'll tab into object mode and convert it into a curve. This is the path that the rope is going to be following. I'm just going to call it rope. I don't really know what else to call it. So to create this rope, it's actually a pretty standard process that I see used a lot anytime you have this kind of pattern. It's not specific to me, and you can find it in a lot of tutorials. So the way to do it is create a circle, go to top view, and we'll size it down a little bit, and then we'll move it over on the X by 1, and we'll go into edit mode, and we'll go down here to the spin duplicate tool. If by default you see this tool, you want to click and hold and select spin duplicates. So now we'll go into top view, and we'll rotate this, and we can hold control to snap to precise increments. So to about right there looks good. Now if they're all connected, you want to come down here to the spin settings, and you want to make sure duplicate is checked. And if they're overlapping like mine are, you can bring down the steps, and that looks pretty good to me. So I'll tab back into object mode, and I'll go object, set origin to geometry so that it puts the origin right in the middle here. And then we'll go to the modifiers and we'll add a screw modifier. And if we bring this screw amount up, you can see we're getting that rope-like pattern. So let's size this down a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a curve modifier and select this curve right here. And you can see it's on the curve, but it's facing the wrong way. So on the curve modifier, we want to select the deformation axis to be Z. And it's following that curve. Now I'm going to size it down a little bit more, like that. And to make it reach all the way around the curve, what we can do is we can increase the screw amount. But real quick before I do that, I'm going to select this curve, and I'm going to rename it Rope Curve. And then I'll name this. Did I rename the wrong thing? What happened here? There it is. Rope. Okay, so now we'll increase the screw amount until it's just about meeting, and you can see that looks pretty bad. So what we can do to get rid of those jagged edges is increase the steps. And then we can increase the angle to make it more twisty, for lack of a better word. I'm going to make it pretty twisty here. Alright, and that looks pretty good. You can see there's a space here, so you could either apply this modifier and try to manually connect these. I'm not going to do that for the sake of this tutorial. I'm going to hold shift and adjust the screw value so that they're just touching. And then you can do the same thing for the angle so that they line up. And that looks pretty good to me. Alright, so now we can press that button underneath the backspace. And you can see it's a bit too big, so you can size it down. Till it's about the right width. And then you can just repeat the process of upping the screw amount, upping the steps, and upping the angle. Alright, and that looks pretty good. So I was off camera when I did this, and I apologize, but I actually applied that screw modifier, because the reason I'm doing this is so that we can tab into edit mode and see all this geometry. And from here we can hit U and Smart UV Project in order to texture this. So this will take a second, just let it do its thing. Go back into object mode and add in that wood material, which looks pretty good. Alright, so now what we can do is we can select the rope and the rope curve, and we can hit Shift D, hit Z to lock it to the Z axis, and we can bring it down and just hit S to size it down, bring it up, size it down a little bit, maybe size it up a little more than that. And we want it to be hiding the edges of that bottom. So let's have a look and see what that looks like. Alright, let's bring it up a little more. Size it up a bit. And that looks pretty good to me. Alright, so real quick, I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning up here. So I'm going to select the bottom here, one of these weaves, and I'm going to apply these modifiers in order. So I'm going to apply the array, and then I'm going to apply the Boolean modifier. And I'm just going to do that for all of these. Okay. Now that that's done, we can Alt-H to unhide everything. We can actually delete the guide mesh now, and we can delete this Boolean cylinder. And now I'm just going to select everything, and I'm going to shift select this top rope here, and I'm going to hit Control P and choose Object Keep Transform, and that way I can just grab this and I can move the basket around as a whole. Alright, and finally I'm just going to adjust the roughness of this wood texture a little bit. So let's go over to the shading tab. And what I'll do is I'll bring that up and out of the way, bring the normal down, grab these and pull them back. And what I think I'm gonna try and use is a curve, Rgb curves like so. And if we pull this bottom value up, you can see that adjusts the roughness, and I think something like that is good enough for now. Let's actually plug this directly in. If you have Node Wrangler enabled, you can just Control-Shift-Click this to do that. Alright, and you can see by default what we have for the roughness. So we have some gray areas and some white areas, and we really want to bring up the white, but we don't want to completely destroy the glossiness. So something like right there should look pretty good. So let's plug this principled back in. And yeah, that looks pretty good to me. Just a small little adjustment on the roughness. And I think that's all for this tutorial. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated. Again, this isn't the most perfect way to make a wicker basket, but it definitely requires the least amount of manual labor, and it's a good way to get it done if you need a background prop or something of the sort. So if you guys enjoyed this tutorial, please slap a like on it and consider subscribing. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please post them in the comments down below. I really enjoy responding to comments and seeing what people have to say about the tutorials I post. So thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best results.